The rain fell in sheets the morning Elena Vasquez arrived at the federal courthouse. Her umbrella had broken 3 blocks back, leaving her soaked through her only good suit. Her right leg dragged with each step, the old injury screaming in protest. She paused at the courthouse steps, staring up at the granite pillars. Somewhere inside sat Dominic Ferraro, the man every defense attorney in the state had refused to represent. Elena adjusted her grip on her briefcase. 26 pounds of law books in desperation. She'd spent 3 sleepless nights preparing. She climbed the steps slowly, her uneven gait echoing against stone. Inside, security guards watched her approach. Word had already spread. Elena passed through the metal detector and made her way to Courtroom 6. The hallway was packed with reporters. The courtroom doors stood before her. She pushed them open. Every head turned. The gallery was full. Prosecutors sat at their table. And at the defense table, utterly alone, sat Dominic Ferraro. He didn't look up when she entered. His hands rested flat on the table. He wore a charcoal suit. His dark hair was combed back, revealing strong features, sharp cheekbones, eyes that calculated everything. Elena walked down the center aisle, her limp impossible to hide. She reached the defense table and set her briefcase down. "Mr. Ferraro," she said quietly, "I'm Elena Vasquez, your attorney." Slowly he raised his eyes to meet hers. They were black and completely unreadable. He studied her face, then her soaked suit, then the way she favored her left leg. "You're younger than I expected," he said quietly. His voice was low, textured. "I'm 28. You look 23. I'll take that as a compliment." It wasn't meant as one. He paused. "How many trials have you done?" 47. "How many did you win?" Elena met his gaze without flinching. 19. "Less than half. My clients are usually guilty." Something flickered in his expression. Not quite amusement. Recognition, perhaps. "And me?" he asked. "That's for the jury to decide." "That's not what I asked." Elena pulled out her chair and sat. Her leg throbbed with relief. "What you are or aren't doesn't matter to me, Mr. Ferraro. What matters is whether the prosecution can prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And from what I've seen in the discovery, they're going to have a very hard time doing that." He was silent for a long moment. "Every lawyer who's sat in that chair," he said quietly, "has told me the same thing, that they'd fight for me, that they'd win. And then, within 72 hours, they disappeared. I'm not going anywhere. You say that now." "I say it because it's true. I took an oath, Mr. Ferraro, and unlike the 10 attorneys before me, I actually intend to honor it." Before he could respond, the bailiff's voice rang out. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus Holden." The courtroom stood as one. Elena rose, carefully, her leg protesting every movement. Beside her, Dominic stood with fluid grace, his posture perfect, his expression unchanged. Judge Holden entered, a stern man in his 60s, with silver hair and eyes like flint. He'd been a federal prosecutor for 2 decades before ascending to the bench. He had no patience for defense attorneys, less for those defending organized crime figures, and apparently none whatsoever for young public defenders who'd taken cases above their station. His gaze swept the courtroom and landed on Elena with barely concealed disdain. "Ms. Vasquez," he said as everyone sat, "I see you've entered your appearance as counsel for the defendant." "Yes, Your Honor." "And you understand the gravity of this case? The charges against Mr. Ferraro include racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. These are serious federal offenses." "I'm fully aware, Your Honor." "Are you prepared to proceed to trial today?" Elena's stomach clenched. Today. She'd expected at least another week. "Yes, Your Honor." Judge Holden's skepticism was palpable. "Very well. We'll begin with jury selection immediately following opening statements. Mr. Cross, you may proceed." Vincent Cross rose from the prosecution table. He was everything Elena wasn't. Expensive suit, perfect posture, the confidence of someone who'd never lost a major case. He was 53 years old and had spent the last year building this case against Dominic Ferraro. It was supposed to be his crowning achievement. He approached the jury box, still empty, but he addressed it as though 12 citizens already sat in judgment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice warm and authoritative. "Over the next several weeks, you will hear testimony about a criminal empire, an organization that has operated in this city for 35 years, an organization responsible for extortion, violence, corruption, and the systematic destruction of everything this justice system stands for." He paused for effect. At the head of that organization sits one man, Dominic Ferraro. He gestured toward the defense table. Dominic's expression didn't change. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the prosecutor. "The evidence will show," Cross continued, "that Mr. Ferraro has built an empire on fear. We will present financial records proving he laundered over $50 million through legitimate businesses. We will present testimony from individuals who witnessed his orders being carried out. We will present surveillance evidence, wiretaps, and documentation that leaves no doubt Dominic Ferraro is not a businessman. He is a criminal mastermind, and he belongs in federal prison for the rest of his natural life." Cross returned to his seat, satisfaction evident in every movement. Judge Holden turned to Elena. "Ms. Vasquez, your opening statement." Elena stood. Her leg nearly buckled. She steadied herself against the table, took a breath, and stepped forward. She didn't approach the jury box, not yet. Instead, she stood in the center of the courtroom, small and rain-soaked and visibly limping. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I want to begin by acknowledging something. I am not Vincent Cross. I don't have his resources, his experience, or his reputation. I'm a public defender who makes $38,000 a year. I live in a studio apartment. I take the bus to work. And until 3 days ago, I had never heard of Dominic Ferraro." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. "But I want you to understand why I'm standing here. Not because I think Mr. Ferraro is a saint. Not because I'm naive about the world he operates in. I'm here because in this country, every person, no matter who they are, no matter what they're accused of, deserves a defense. A real defense. Not a performance, not a formality. A defense that challenges the prosecution to actually prove their case." She moved closer to where the jury would sit. "Mr. Cross just told you about an empire built on fear. He told you about $50 million. He told you about surveillance and wiretaps. What he didn't tell you is that not a single piece of that evidence directly links Dominic Ferraro to a crime." Her voice remained calm, measured. "The prosecution will present financial records, but financial records can be manipulated, misinterpreted, or simply wrong. They will present testimony from witnesses who have every reason to lie. Witnesses who've been offered reduced sentences, immunity, protection. Witnesses who will say anything to save themselves." She paused, letting silence fill the room. "They will present surveillance that shows Mr. Ferraro meeting with various individuals, but meeting someone is not a crime. Knowing someone is not a crime. Being suspected of running an organization is not a crime. In this courtroom, the only thing that matters is proof. And when you examine the actual evidence, not the assumptions, not the reputation, not the fear, you will find that the prosecution's case is built on a foundation of speculation and desperation." She turned to face Judge Holden. "Dominic Ferraro is on trial because of who he is, not because of what he's done, and in the United States of America, that is not enough to convict." Elena returned to her seat. Her leg was shaking. She pressed her hand against it beneath the table, willing it to be still. Beside her, Dominic leaned close. His voice was barely audible. "You just made yourself a target." "I was already a target," Elena whispered back, "the moment I walked through those doors." "If you're still listening, You're exactly where this story needs you. Jury selection took 6 hours. 6 hours of questions, assessments, and challenges. The prosecution wanted jurors who feared crime. The defense needed jurors who understood reasonable doubt. By the time 12 people were seated, Elena's leg was on fire. She'd been standing for most of the day, unable to show weakness, unable to ask for a break. When Judge Holden finally called a recess, she sat heavily in her chair. "You need to rest," Dominic said. "I'm fine." "You're in pain. That's not your concern." "Everything about this trial is my concern." He stood. "There's a conference room down the hall. I'll have my people bring you something to eat." "I don't need—" "You've eaten nothing all day. You're exhausted. And if you collapse tomorrow, this trial ends and we start over with another attorney who'll just abandon me like the rest." His gaze was steady. "Take care of yourself, not for me, for the case." Before she could argue, he walked toward the holding area where marshals waited to escort him back to his cell. Elena gathered her files slowly. Every movement hurt. She'd been living on coffee and adrenaline for days, and her body was finally starting to rebel. "Miss Vasquez." She looked up. Vincent Cross stood at the prosecution table watching her, with an expression caught between pity and contempt. "You did well today," he said. "Better than I expected." "Thank you. But you should know. This case is over. I have 15 witnesses, financial experts, FBI agents, former associates who will testify to everything Ferraro has done. You can't win this." Elena closed her briefcase. "Then you have nothing to worry about." "I'm not worried about winning. I'm worried about you." Cross stepped closer. "Defending men like Ferraro has consequences. Your career, your reputation, your safety, all of it becomes collateral damage. You're young. You have your whole future ahead of you. Don't throw it away on a lost cause." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice, from someone who's been doing this a lot longer than you." Elena met his gaze. "I appreciate your concern, but I took this case knowing exactly what it meant, and I'm not walking away." Cross shook his head. "Then you're braver than you are smart." He left. Elena stood alone in the empty courtroom, listening to the echo of his footsteps fade. That night, Elena returned to her apartment long after dark. The bus ride had taken an hour, the walk from the stop to her building another 15 minutes. By the time she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her door, she could barely stand. She dropped her briefcase just inside the entrance and collapsed onto her secondhand couch. The apartment was small, one room serving as bedroom, living room, and office, a kitchenette with a hot plate and a mini fridge, a bathroom with a shower that only produced cold water half the time. She'd lived here for 4 years. 4 years of telling herself it was temporary, that she'd save money, pay down her debt, eventually move somewhere better. But the debt never shrank. Her father's medical bills from the accident, her own surgeries, the student loans, it all added up to a number so large she'd stopped. Looking at the statements, Elena pulled out her laptop and opened the case files she'd copied. 15 witnesses, Cross had said. She needed to know everything about each one before they took the stand. She worked until 3 a.m, taking notes, cross-referencing statements, looking for inconsistencies. When she finally slept, she dreamed of courtrooms and black eyes that saw straight through her. The prosecution's first witness took the stand at 9:30 the following morning. Gerald Pritchard, age 52, former accountant, current federal informant. He wore a suit that didn't fit properly and sweat through it within minutes of sitting down. His eyes darted around the courtroom, never settling on Dominic. Vincent Cross approached with a folder in hand. "Mr. Pritchard, can you please tell the jury how you know the defendant?" "I worked for him. Did his books." "For how long?" 8 years. "And what did that work entail?" Pritchard shifted in his seat. "I managed accounts for his businesses, restaurants, a construction company, import-export operations, made sure the numbers added up." "And were those businesses legitimate?" "Some of them, on paper." "What do you mean by on paper?" "I mean, the restaurants were real. The construction company did actual work, but the money flowing through them didn't all come from legitimate sources. Cross nodded. Can you elaborate? Mr. Ferraro ran what people call a protection racket. Businesses would pay him monthly fees for security. He also had loan operations, high-interest loans to people who couldn't get them anywhere else. And gambling. Lots of gambling. All that money needed to be cleaned. That's where I came in. So you laundered money for Dominic Ferraro? Yes. At his direction? Yes. Did you keep records of these transactions? I kept everything. Spreadsheets, account numbers, wire transfers. I knew one day I might need proof. Cross produced a thick binder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter Exhibits 1 through 37. Judge Holden nodded. Admitted? Cross handed the binder to Pritchard. Are these the records you kept? Pritchard flipped through pages, his hands trembling slightly. Yes, these are mine. And they document the money laundering you performed for the defendant? Yes. Thank you, Mr. Pritchard. Cross returned to his seat. No further questions. Elena stood. Her leg protested, but she ignored it. She approached the witness stand slowly, giving herself time to think. Mr. Pritchard, she began, her voice gentle, you testified that you worked for Mr. Ferraro for 8 years. Is that correct? Yes. And during those 8 years you were paid for your work? Yes. How much? He hesitated. I don't know exactly. Estimate. Maybe $150,000 a year. So over 8 years you earned approximately $1.2 million. I suppose? Did you report that? Income on your tax returns? Pritchard's face reddened. Most of it. Most of it, not all of it. There were some cash payments that you didn't report, so you committed tax fraud. Objection, Cross said. Relevance. Your Honor, Elena replied calmly, the witness's credibility is absolutely relevant. Overruled, the witness will answer. Pritchard glared at her. I didn't report everything. How much didn't you report? I don't remember. Hundreds of thousands of dollars? Maybe. So while you were allegedly keeping records to protect yourself from my client, you were also committing federal crimes yourself. I was following orders. Whose orders? Did Mr. Ferraro tell you to hide income from the IRS? Not in so many words. Did he tell you in any words? No, but did anyone working for him tell you to commit tax fraud? No. So you made that decision yourself. Pritchard's jaw clenched. It was implied. Implied how? Everyone knew how it worked. Everyone knew, or you assumed? I knew. Elena picked up the binder of exhibits. Mr. Pritchard, you said you kept these records because you thought you might need proof one day. Proof of what? Proof of what he was doing. But you were doing it too. You just testified that you laundered money, committed tax fraud, and participated in illegal financial activities for 8 years. These records prove your guilt as much as anyone else's. I was just the accountant. You were an active participant, and when federal agents arrested you for money laundering and tax evasion, you agreed to testify against my client in exchange for immunity, correct? Silence. Mr. Pritchard? Yes. So you're not here because you want to tell the truth. You're here because you cut a deal to save yourself from prison. I am telling the truth. Are you? Or are you telling the story the prosecution wants to hear so you can walk away free while my client takes the fall for crimes you committed together? Objection. Cross was on his feet. Withdrawn. Elena set the binder down. Mr. Pritchard, in all these records you kept, is there a single document with Dominic Ferraro's signature ordering you to commit a crime? He didn't sign things like that. Is there a single email from him directing money laundering? He didn't use email for that. A single recording of his voice? No. A single piece of direct evidence linking him to the crimes you've described? Pritchard's face was red. He was smart about it. Or perhaps he wasn't involved at all, and you're blaming him to save yourself. That's not true. No further questions. Elena returned to her seat. Her heart was pounding, but she kept her expression neutral. Beside her, Dominic was perfectly still, but when she sat down, he leaned close. "Well done," he murmured. The second witness was a restaurant owner named Marcus Delgado. He claimed Dominic had extorted protection money from him for 5 years. Cross led him through his testimony. "Mr. Delgado, can you describe your interactions with the defendant?" "He came to my restaurant maybe 6 years ago. Said he'd heard I was having trouble with vandalism, break-ins. Said he could help." "What kind of help?" "Protection. He said for $2,000 a month, nothing bad would happen to my place." "And if you didn't pay?" "He didn't say directly, but the implication was clear." "Did you pay?" "For 5 years. Every month." "Why did you stop?" "Because I finally went to the police." "And what happened to your restaurant after that?" Delgado's voice shook. "It burned down. Total loss." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Cross let the moment breathe. No further questions. Elena stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Delgado," she said, "I'm sorry about your restaurant. That must have been devastating." "It was." "When did it burn down?" 3 months ago. "And the fire marshal investigated?" "Yes." "What did they conclude?" Delgado hesitated. "Electrical fire." "Electrical fire? Not arson?" "That's what they said." "So there's no evidence the fire was connected to you stopping payments to my client?" "I know what I know." "You know, or you believe?" "It's not a coincidence." "Mr. Delgado, you said you paid my client $2,000 a month for 5 years. That's $120,000, correct?" "Yes." "Did you report those payments on your business taxes?" His expression shifted. "No." "Why not?" "Because they were extortion payments. Or because they were cash payments you hid from the IRS to avoid taxes." "Objection." Cross stood. "Your Honor," Elena said, "the witness has admitted to tax fraud. That's relevant to his credibility." "Overruled," Elena continued. "Mr. Delgado, your restaurant, how is it doing financially?" "Fine." "Really? Because I have your business filings here." She held up documents. "You filed for bankruptcy twice in the last 8 years. You owed over $300,000 to various creditors. Your restaurant was failing." "That's not..." "And 3 months before the fire, you increased your insurance coverage on the building from $200,000 to $800,000, correct?" Delgado's face went pale. Yes, but..." "So let me understand this. Your business was failing. You were hundreds of thousands in debt. You massively increased your insurance. And then your building conveniently burned down in what the fire marshal ruled an electrical fire. And now you're blaming my client for extortion when you have no proof, no witnesses, and a very strong financial motive to burn down your own restaurant." "I didn't burn down my restaurant." "Then who did?" "I don't know, but..." "You don't know. You're guessing. You're assuming. You're blaming a man because it's easier than accepting that your business failed through your own mismanagement. That's not true." No further questions. Elena sat down. The courtroom was silent. Dominic leaned toward her. "You're destroying them." "That's the job," she whispered back. The trial continued for days. Witness after witness took the stand, each one presented as damning evidence. Each one fell apart under Elena's questioning. A police informant who claimed he'd witnessed Dominic order violence, until Elena produced phone records showing the informant was in a different state when the alleged conversation occurred. A former business partner who accused Dominic of threatening him, until Elena revealed the partner had embezzled $200,000 from their joint venture. An FBI agent who testified about surveillance, until Elena got him to admit they'd never actually recorded Dominic saying anything incriminating. She worked 20-hour days, survived on coffee and determination. Her apartment became a war room, files covering every surface, sticky notes on walls, timelines drawn on her windows with dry erase markers. Her leg screamed in constant pain. She ignored it. Every evening, after court adjourned, Dominic's driver waited outside, a black Mercedes with tinted windows. The first night, Elena had walked past it, the window lowered. "Ms. Vasquez," came Dominic's voice from inside. "Get in. I take the bus. Not anymore." "Mr. Ferraro, you're defending me. That makes you a target. The people who want me convicted don't care about collateral damage. Get in the car." She hesitated, exhaustion making her defenses weak. "Please," he added quietly. She got in. The interior was immaculate. Leather seats, climate control, the subtle scent of expensive cologne. It felt like stepping into a different universe. "Where do you live?" Dominic asked. Elena gave the address. His driver nodded and pulled into traffic. They rode in silence for several minutes. Elena stared out the window, watching the city slide past. "You're very good," Dominic finally said. "I'm doing my job." "No, you're doing more than that. You're dismantling their entire case. Every witness, every piece of evidence, you find the weakness and you exploit it without mercy. That's what defense attorneys do." "Not like you." He studied her profile. "Why did you really take this case?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Because everyone deserves a defense. Even you." "Even me," he repeated. "You don't know anything about me. I know you're on trial for crimes the prosecution can't prove. That's all I need to know. You don't want to know if I'm guilty? It doesn't matter." "It doesn't matter," he said slowly. "If I've hurt people, if I've built an empire on violence and fear." Elena turned to face him. "In that courtroom, the only thing that matters is whether they can prove it. What you've actually done, what you're capable of, that's between you and whatever God you believe in. My job is to make sure the government doesn't send you to prison based on speculation and testimony from criminals trying to save themselves." Dominic held her gaze. "And if I am guilty, if everything they're saying is true, then the prosecution should be able to prove it. And if they can't, you walk free. That's how the system works." "The system," he said with something that might have been amusement, "doesn't work for men like me." "Then I guess we're both trying to prove something." The car stopped outside her building. Elena looked at the graffiti-covered walls, the broken sidewalk, the group of men smoking on the corner. Dominic's expression darkened as he took in her neighborhood. "You live here," he said. Not a question. "Yes." "Alone?" "Yes. On a public defender's salary. $38,000 a year." He was silent for a long moment. "Tomorrow. Same time." Elena gathered her briefcase. "You don't have to." "I do." His voice was firm. "Tomorrow." She got out of the car and watched it drive away, its taillights disappearing into the darkness. The prosecution's final witness was supposed to be their masterpiece. Anthony Barros, Dominic's underboss for 15 years, the man who'd accepted full immunity in exchange for testimony. When he took the stand, the courtroom went silent. Barros was 46, built like a boxer, with scars on his knuckles and eyes that had seen too much. He wore a suit that didn't quite fit and kept his gaze away from Dominic. Vincent Cross approached him with barely contained triumph. "Mr. Barros, how long did you work for Dominic Ferraro?" 15 years. "And what was your role?" "I did whatever he needed, managed his operations, made sure things ran smoothly." "What kind of operations?" "All of them. The legitimate businesses and the illegal ones." "Can you be more specific about the illegal operations?" "Collection. When people owed money, I collected it. Protection. When businesses needed to be convinced to pay for security, I convinced them. Enforcement. When someone caused problems, I handled it." "And Dominic Ferraro ordered you to do these things?" "Every single time." "Did you ever question these orders?" "No." "Why not?" "Because you don't question Dominic Ferraro. You do what you're told, or you end up like the people who didn't." Murmurs spread through the gallery. Cross let the moment build. Mr. Barros, in 15 years, how many crimes would you estimate you committed on Mr. Ferraro's orders? Hundreds, maybe thousands. And you're willing to testify to specific instances? Yes. Cross smiled. Please proceed. For the next hour, Barros detailed crimes, beatings, intimidation, extortion, money laundering, each story more damaging than the last, each one implicating Dominic directly. The jury listened with rapt attention. Several took notes. Others simply stared at Dominic, whose expression never changed. When Cross finally finished, he returned to his seat with visible satisfaction. Your witness, Ms. Vasquez. Elena stood. Every eye in the courtroom tracked her movement. Her limp seemed more pronounced than ever as she approached the witness stand. She stopped a few feet from Barros and studied him in silence. Mr. Barros, she finally said, you've accepted full immunity for your testimony here today. Is that correct? Yes. That means no matter what crimes you confess to, assault, extortion, even murder, you will face no consequences whatsoever, correct? That's the deal. So you could lie right now and you'd still walk free. I'm not lying, but you could. You have every incentive to tell the prosecution exactly what they want to hear. Barros's jaw tightened. I'm telling the truth. Are you? Let me ask you something. In 15 years working for Mr. Ferraro, did you ever keep evidence, recordings, documents, photographs? No. Why not? Because that would get me killed. So we have only your word for everything you've just testified to. Yes. Your word given under immunity with no corroboration whatsoever. Elena paused. Mr. Barros, how much money did you make working for my client? I don't know exactly. Estimate. Maybe $3 million over the years. $3 million. And you spent it on what? Houses, cars, my family. So you benefited greatly from this allegedly criminal enterprise? I did what I was told. No one forced you to stay, did they? It's not that simple. Why not? Did Mr. Ferraro threaten you if you left? Not directly. Did he prevent you from quitting? No. Did he refuse to release you from employment? No. So you stayed because it was profitable. Barros said nothing. Mr. Barros, why are you really here? Because I want out of the life. You want out, or you got caught? His face reddened. I got arrested. For what? Money laundering, assault, racketeering. The same crimes you're accusing my client of. Yes. And you were facing how much prison time? 25 years. So you agreed to testify against the man who made you a millionaire in exchange for walking free, correct? I agreed to tell the truth. Did you? Elena stepped closer. Let me ask you about one specific incident. You testified that 3 years ago, my client ordered you to collect a debt from a man named Robert Chen. You said Mr. Ferraro told you to make sure Chen understands the consequences of not paying, correct? Yes. And you interpreted that as an order to assault Mr. Chen? Yes. But Mr. Ferraro never actually said to hurt him. He didn't have to. It was understood. Elena pulled out a document. Mr. Barros, I have phone records here showing that on the day you allegedly had this conversation with my client, he was in Chicago attending his mother's funeral. He was there for 3 days. So unless you're claiming he gave this order over the phone, your testimony is impossible. Barros's face went pale. I might have the dates wrong. You might have the dates wrong, or you might be lying. I'm not lying. Then explain how my client ordered you to do something when he was in a different state. It must have been a different time. So your testimony is unreliable. No, you just what? Made a mistake? Confused the details or fabricated the entire story? Objection. Cross was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. Your Honor, Elena said calmly, I'm simply pointing out that the witness's testimony is factually impossible. Overruled. The witness will answer. Barrows glared at her. I'm not making this up. No? Let's talk about another incident. You testified that my client ordered you to burn down a warehouse. When was that? 5 years ago. June. June of 5 years ago. Mr. Barrows, were you aware that the warehouse you claim was burned down is still standing? It's currently being used as a distribution center for a furniture company. Silence. Mr. Barrows? It must have been a different warehouse. A different warehouse? So again, your testimony is unreliable. I'm doing my best. Are you? Or are you telling the prosecution whatever they want to hear so you can avoid spending the next 25 years in prison? Barrows's hands clenched into fists. I'm telling the truth about who he is, about what he's done. Really? Then tell me this. In 15 years of working for Dominic Ferraro, in all the crimes you claim he ordered, did you ever once try to stop him? Did you ever refuse an order? Did you ever go to the police? No. Why not? Because I was afraid. Afraid of what? You just testified he never directly threatened you. I was afraid of what would happen. Based on what? Your assumptions, your fears, or actual threats? Based on knowing how things work. So you assumed. You guessed. And now facing prison, you've decided to blame everything on my client rather than accept responsibility for your own choices. Elena turned to the jury. Mr. Barrows has confessed to earning $3 million from criminal activity. He's admitted to assault, extortion, and money laundering. He's facing 25 years in prison, and in exchange for immunity, he's willing to say anything the prosecution wants. His testimony is unsupported by evidence, contradicted by facts, and motivated entirely by self-preservation. That is not credible testimony. That is a desperate man trying to save himself. She faced Barrows again. No further questions. The courtroom was silent as she returned to her seat. Beside her, Dominic sat perfectly still. But when she sat down, she felt his hand briefly touch her shoulder. "Thank you," he murmured. The prosecution rested their case the following morning. 13 witnesses, hundreds of documents, surveillance footage, financial records, and Elena had dismantled all of it. Judge. Holden called a brief recess before the defense would present its case. Elena gathered her files in the empty courtroom. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. She'd barely slept in 2 weeks. Her leg was in constant agony. She was running on adrenaline and determination. Ms. Vasquez. She looked up. Vincent Cross stood at the prosecution table. For the first time, he didn't look confident. He looked tired. "You've done well," he said quietly. "Better than anyone expected." "Thank you. But this isn't over. We have closing arguments. The jury could still convict." "They could, if they ignore reasonable doubt." Cross stepped closer. "I want you to understand something. I've spent a year building this case, a year of my life dedicated to stopping a man who has hurt countless people, and you're going to let him walk. I'm going to make sure he gets a fair trial. There's a difference." "Is there?" Cross's voice was bitter. "You know what he is, what he's done, and you're defending him anyway. That's my job. Your job is to serve justice." "No," Elena said firmly. "My job is to serve my client. Justice is for the jury to decide." Cross shook his head. "I hope you can live with that." He walked away. Elena sat alone, staring at the empty jury box. Could she live with it? She thought about Dominic Ferraro, about the man who sat beside her every day, perfectly controlled, perfectly composed. The man whose eyes revealed nothing. The man who might be everything the prosecution claimed. But none of that mattered, because in this courtroom, she wasn't defending the man. She was defending the principle that the government must prove its case, that accusations aren't enough, that fear and reputation and suspicion cannot replace evidence. If she abandoned that principle, she abandoned everything she believed in. So yes, she could live with it. The defense rested without calling a single witness. Judge Holden seemed surprised. Ms. Vasquez, you're not presenting a defense. Your Honor, the prosecution has failed to meet its burden of proof. The defense has nothing to rebut because they've proven nothing. It was a calculated risk, but Elena believed the prosecution's case was weak enough that adding defense witnesses would only give the jury something to question. Judge Holden nodded slowly. Very well. We'll proceed to closing arguments tomorrow morning. That night, Elena worked until dawn preparing her closing. It had to be perfect. Everything came down to this. When Dominic's car dropped her off at her apartment, he walked her to her door. You don't have to, she started. I want to. They climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly. Elena's leg protested every step. At her door, she turned to face him. Tomorrow, she said, no matter what happens, you're going to win, Dominic interrupted. You don't know that. I know you. I've watched you work. You're going to walk into that courtroom and you're going to remind that jury what justice actually means. He paused. And they're going to listen. Elena studied his face in the dim hallway light. Why do you have so much faith in me? Because you walked into a courtroom where everyone expected you to fail. You had every reason to be afraid, every reason to walk away, but you didn't. You stood your ground, you fought, and you never once let them see you break. His voice was soft. That kind of strength is rare. I'm not strong. I'm terrified every single day. Being afraid and standing anyway, that's the definition of strength. He turned to leave. Mr. Ferraro, he looked back. Why didn't you run? Before the trial, you could have disappeared. I could have, but then I would spend the rest of my life running. This way, I face it, and either I walk away free or I go to prison knowing I fought. He disappeared down the stairs. Elena entered her apartment and sat at her desk staring at her closing argument notes. Tomorrow would decide everything. The courtroom was packed for closing arguments, every seat filled. Reporters lined the walls. The air crackled with anticipation. Vincent Cross rose first. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began. Over the past 2 weeks, you have heard testimony from 13 witnesses. You have seen financial records documenting $50 million in laundered money. You have heard from men who worked for Dominic Ferraro, who followed his orders, who witnessed his crimes. He paced before the jury box. The defense would have you believe these witnesses are liars, that they're all making up stories to save themselves. But I ask you, is it more likely that 13 different people with 13 different backgrounds are all lying? Or is it more likely that they're telling the truth about a man who has spent 35 years building a criminal empire? His voice rose. Dominic Ferraro is not on trial because of who he is. He's on trial because of what he's done. The evidence proves he laundered money. It proves he ordered violence. It proves he corrupted businesses and destroyed lives. And the fact that he was smart enough to avoid leaving a paper trail doesn't make him innocent. It makes him calculating. He stopped in front of the jury. You have an opportunity to send a message that in this city, no one is above the law, not even Dominic Ferraro. I urge you to find him guilty on all counts. Cross sat down. Judge Holden turned to Elena. Ms. Vasquez. Elena stood. Her leg ached. Her head pounded from exhaustion, but her voice was steady as she approached the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, she began quietly, Mr. Cross just asked you to send a message, but this trial is not about sending messages. It's not about making examples. It's about one thing. Did the prosecution prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Dominic Ferraro committed the crimes he's accused of? She moved slowly along the jury box. Beyond a reasonable doubt. Not beyond all doubt. Not beyond any doubt. Beyond reasonable doubt. And when you examine the evidence presented in this trial, you will find that reasonable doubt exists everywhere. Her voice remained calm. Gerald Pritchard testified that he laundered money, but he also admitted to committing tax fraud and had every reason to blame my client to save himself. Marcus Delgado claimed extortion, but his business was failing and he had a massive financial motive to burn down his own building for insurance money. Anthony Barros confessed to crimes, but provided testimony that was contradicted by phone records and basic facts. She paused. Every single witness presented by the prosecution had a reason to lie. Every single one was offered deals, immunity, reduced sentences. Every single one benefited from pointing fingers at my client. And not one of them, not one, provided direct evidence linking Dominic Ferraro to a crime. Elena faced the jury directly. Mr. Cross said my client was smart enough to avoid a paper trail. But isn't it equally possible that there's no paper trail because he didn't commit these crimes? That the witnesses are lying? That the prosecution built a case on assumptions rather than facts? She let the question hang. In this country, we do not convict people based on fear. We do not convict based on reputation. We do not convict because prosecutors spend a year building a case and want to win. We convict when the evidence proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Her voice grew stronger. The prosecution has not met that burden. They have presented witnesses who contradict themselves, documents that prove nothing, and speculation dressed up as evidence. They have asked you to assume guilt based on who Dominic Ferraro is rather than what he's done. And that is not enough. She returned to her position. I ask you to do something difficult. I ask you to look past the fear. Look past the assumptions. Look at the actual evidence. And when you do, you will find that the prosecution's case is built on a foundation of sand. You will find reasonable doubt, and when you do, you are legally required to, find Dominic Ferraro not guilty. Elena walked back to the defense table and sat down. The courtroom was silent. Judge Holden gave the jury their instructions. They filed out to deliberate, and then there was nothing to do but wait. The jury deliberated for 4 days. 4 days of Elena pacing her apartment, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything else. 4 days of her phone staying silent. 4 days of wondering if she'd done enough. On the afternoon of the 4th day, her phone rang. Ms. Vasquez, this is the clerk. The jury has reached a verdict. Judge Holden wants everyone back in court in 1 hour. Elena's heart stopped. I'll be there. She took the bus to the courthouse. The longest ride of her life. Every minute felt like an hour. When she entered the courtroom, Dominic was already seated at the defense table. He looked calm, composed, as though the next few minutes wouldn't determine the rest of his life. Ms. Vasquez, he said as she sat beside him. Mr. Ferraro. Whatever happens... Don't, she interrupted. Not yet. The jury filed in, 12 faces, all carefully neutral. Judge Holden took his seat. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. Please read it. The foreman unfolded a piece of paper. The courtroom held its breath. We, the jury, in the matter of United States versus Dominic Ferraro, find the defendant, Elena's hands clenched beneath the table, not guilty on all counts. The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushed for the doors. The prosecution sat in stunned silence. The gallery erupted in shouts, some of victory, some of outrage. Elena sat perfectly still, unable to process what she'd just heard. Not guilty, on all counts. They'd won. Beside her, Dominic remained motionless. His expression hadn't changed. But when she turned to look at him, she saw his eyes had closed. Just for a moment. Relief washing over a man who never showed emotion. Judge Holden dismissed the jury and adjourned the court. Marshals approached to remove Dominic's monitoring bracelet. Elena gathered her files with shaking hands. Ms. Vasquez? She looked up. Dominic stood before her, free for the first time in months. Walk with me, he said quietly. They left through a side exit, avoiding the media circus out front. His car waited in an underground garage. Inside, silence stretched between them. You saved my life, Dominic finally said. I did my job. No. He turned to face her. You did more than that. You stood in a room full of people who wanted me destroyed, and you refused to let them win. You fought for me when no one else would. You believed in the principle even when you didn't know if you believed in me." Elena was quiet for a moment. "What will you do now?" "Disappear for a while. Let things calm down. Then rebuild quietly." "And the accusations? The crimes they couldn't prove?" Dominic met her gaze. "You don't want to know the answer to that question." "You're probably right." The car moved through the city. Rain had started again, streaking the windows. "What will you do?" he asked. Elena thought about her apartment, her debt, her caseload waiting at the public defender's office. "Go back to work." "You could do better than that now. After this trial, firms will want you." "Maybe. But I became a lawyer to help people who couldn't afford anyone else. That hasn't changed." Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and withdrew an envelope. "Your fee," he said. "Mr. Ferraro, I was assigned to your case. The state pays $38,000 a year. This is from me, for what you actually did." He placed the envelope in her hands. Elena opened it. Inside was a check for $250,000. Her breath caught. "I can't accept this." "You can, and you will. This is too much. It's exactly what you're worth. Actually, it's less than what you're worth, but it's what I have liquid at the moment." His voice was firm. "Take it. Pay off your debt. Get a better apartment. Buy a car. Give yourself the life you deserve." "I don't, Elena." It was the first time he'd used her first name. "You walked into a courtroom with a limp and a briefcase full of borrowed law books. You faced down federal prosecutors. You dismantled their entire case. You saved me from spending the rest of my life in prison. Take the money." Elena stared at the check. $250,000. Enough to erase her father's medical debt. Enough to move somewhere safe. Enough to breathe. "Thank you," she whispered. The car stopped outside her building. Dominic looked at the graffiti, the broken windows, the men on the corner. "You won't be here much longer," he said quietly. "How do you know?" "Because I know you. You're going to take that money and you're going to build something better. Not just for yourself, for the people you defend." Elena gathered her briefcase and the envelope. "Mr. Ferraro." "Dominic," he corrected. "Dominic. If you ever need anything—" "I won't, but if you ever do—" He handed her a card with a phone number. Nothing else. "Call." She stepped out of the car into the rain, the window lowered one last time. "Ms. Vasquez, Elena. What you did in that courtroom wasn't just about the law. You reminded everyone watching what justice actually means. You proved that one person with conviction can stand against an entire system. Don't ever let anyone make you believe you're anything less than extraordinary." The window rose. The car disappeared into the rain. Elena stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking through her suit, holding a check. That would change her life. 6 months later, Elena stood outside a small office building in a better part of the city. The sign above the door read, "Vasquez and Associates, Criminal Defense. 1 partner, 2 associates, a caseload she could manage. Clients who needed her." She still took public defender cases, still represented people who couldn't afford anyone else. But now she did it by choice, with resources, with the ability to give each case the attention it deserved. Her debt was gone. Her apartment had heat, security, and windows that locked. She'd bought a car, nothing fancy, but reliable. And most importantly, she'd hired an investigator and a paralegal, so her clients got the defense they actually needed. The phone on her desk rang. "Vasquez and Associates." "Elena?" She recognized the voice immediately. "Dominic. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine. I wanted you to know I saw the article about your new practice. The Post did a feature. Called you the defense attorney who beat the feds. I saw it. You're becoming famous. I'm becoming busy, which is good." Silence stretched between them. "Dominic," Elena said quietly, "why did you really call?" because I wanted to hear your voice, to know you're all right. I'm all right, better than all right. Good. A pause. If you ever need anything, I know. I have your number. Elena, yes? What you did, what you continue to do, it matters. Don't ever forget that. The line went dead. Elena set the phone down and looked around her office, at the files stacked on her desk, at the law degree on her wall, at the photograph of her father she kept in a frame. She thought about the courtroom, about the moment she'd walked in with a limp and a briefcase while everyone watched, everyone judged, everyone expected her to fail. She thought about standing before a jury and fighting for a principle, even when she didn't know if she believed in the man. She thought about justice, real justice, the kind that required proof, evidence, and the courage to demand that the government meet its burden. And she thought about how far she'd come from that rain-soaked morning when she'd climbed courthouse steps, wondering if she'd survive the day. The courtroom had fallen silent when she entered. Now the world was listening, and she was just getting started,